You're listening to WPPM LP in Philadelphia. Stay tuned for the People Power Lunch Hour. Hello, and welcome to the People Power Lunch Hour show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber. And on today's show, we're going to be discussing net neutrality. On December 14th, the FCC is going to be holding a very important vote on a proposal presented by FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai to repeal net neutrality rules. On this edition of the People Power Lunch Hour, we'll speak with our Executive Director, Gretjen Clausing, who's going to talk about why community media is in this fight. We'll talk to local organizer Kitty Heite, and we'll also speak with some folks from the Media Action Grassroots Network. Erin Shields, who is the internet organizer for the Center for Media Justice, and Luong, who's another organizer with a local organization, Media Mobilizing Project. We'll talk about net neutrality, communication, internet freedom, and more on this edition of the People Power Lunch Hour. Our show is broadcast live from PhillyCam Studios here in Center City. We are simulcast on our 2 cable TV channels and live on WPPM 106.5 FM. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the People Power Lunch Hour show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and today we're going to talk about an issue that's very close to all of our hearts here at PhillyCam, and that's net neutrality. But before we get into our discussion, some of you might be wondering, what is net neutrality? You've probably been seeing it trending a lot on Twitter, Facebook, and other social media, and know something is abuzz with the internet. So on our show today, we have a variety of very empowering female guests who are going to talk to you about this issue and tell you why it's relevant and important to people here in Philadelphia and all over the country. So our first guest is a national organizer with the Center for Media Justice, which is a nonprofit based in the Bay Area that does national advocacy work and organizing with community and independent media centers just like PhillyCam. PhillyCam is a member of their Media Action Grassroots Network. And together we advocate for free, open media and media that is accessible to all. I'd like to welcome Erin Shields. She is coming to us live from Washington, D.C. and getting ready for a big rally and action that they're having outside the Federal Communications Commission tomorrow during the vote. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
All right. So if you could, in layperson's terms, describe net neutrality and why this issue relates to people's use of the internet.
Absolutely. So net neutrality is the principle that drives the concept of a free and open internet. So it basically means that if anybody here that's listening pays their internet service provider or ISP, so you're paying Verizon, you're paying Comcast or whoever, that you pay once and you should have access to the entire internet. Any legal content you should have access to. So what sort of builds this net neutrality is these things called the 2015 Open Internet Rules. And so those were fought and won at the Federal Communications Commission, which currently handles issues of internet, ISP, and telecom work, right? And so what those 2015 Open Internet Rules did was they prohibited internet service providers from blocking content. So ISPs could not have any sort of editorial control over what you see. They stopped throttling. So ISPs can't slow you down. And they stopped paid prioritization, which people are most familiar hearing in terms of a fast lane and a slow lane. So other sort of providers cannot, ISPs can't create a fast lane, or companies like Netflix or any sort of other content providers to get their media to you quicker. It all goes at the same speed, right? And so why this is important is because net neutrality makes the internet a free and open space for people to collaborate on ideas, to access education, to access health information, to build with one another. A lot of these powerful movements that we've seen, from Black Lives Matter to No Dapple at Standing Rock, were powered by actual people on the ground and not necessarily big media companies. And so it's important that large internet companies aren't able to block people communicating over these tools that we're using, like Twitter and Facebook, to really tell the real stories of what's going on in our community. And so it impacts us in those ways, but also in terms of people's ability to access the internet for educational use. Most kids these days, or a lot of kids, their textbooks are online. They're researching online. And so it's incredibly important that we maintain these 2015 open internet rules, and that Ajit Pai, Chairman Pai, isn't able to roll these back in favor of handing over internet.
I think we're losing you a little bit, but thank you for that explanation. That was Erin Shields. She's with the Center for Media Justice, talking about what is net neutrality and the protections that it provides to consumers of the internet. I want to welcome Gretjen Clausing. She's our executive director here at PhillyCam, our fearless leader, and she's been involved in the fight for public access for over 20 years. And like many of us feel, this is just another event in the long fight to access to communication.
Exactly. And, in a lot of ways, I feel that some of the same challenges that media organizers are facing now around net neutrality and this fight for a free and open internet are similar to some of the challenges that we faced as advocates for public access television, because here in Philadelphia, we were trying to advocate that people support the creation of a public access TV station here, but they had never seen what that could look like or what it could mean. And getting folks to pay attention to kind of media policy, which in a lot of kind of people's minds wasn't a priority issue, was really a challenging thing to do until there started to be very clear indications of what it meant to live in a world where there was increased media consolidation. And once activists who were working in various social justice fields or artists were then seeing that they were having kind of limited access to be able to get their stories told, it made it a lot easier to bring people on to a media policy fight. So I definitely see a lot of similarities here. And, here at PhillyCam, we've got our public access television producers and now our radio station hosts. So we are a community of content creators. And so having access to be able to distribute our content on a free and open internet is critical. To me, you're talking about, with the changes to that are, potentially going to be happening, yes, they're talking about lack of competition and, raising prices, that the ISPs are going to kind of have just a ticket to do that. But it's also going to be about limiting speech. We are, PhillyCam is an organization that is based in kind of a First Amendment and committed to using our platforms as a way for people to be able to express themselves, and that often means sometimes expressing points of view that aren't popular or that aren't heard in the mainstream media. And my concern as the ED here, who is kind of is that potentially our members' content could be slowed down or not be made as readily accessible as it's been under the net neutrality.
Shows like the People Power Lunch Hour.
Exactly.
Could be slowed down because we stream it live on our web channel and also on our internet station. And also the social media that people use to promote their shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was just sort of as we were getting ready to go on the air, I was just kind of running down and thinking like all the different platforms that our producers use. You know, in addition to YouTube, they're using Vimeo for their videos. They're using SoundCloud and Mixcloud, and for their audio shows and podcasts, we're using TuneIn. You know, which is a phone app, so people can listen to this radio show. We're live streaming this right now, and we found that, you know, the model for public access television has really been sort of changing over the past couple of years. I mean, we were very excited to be able to get our cable channel 8 years ago when we went on the air, but at that moment already television was going through this kind of evolution, and more people were accessing their content online. And, you know, you've seen a shift in that. And so for us to be relevant, it was really critical that we provide a way for our members to distribute and share their content online. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, for them, it's we provide, you know, learning and support so that they can not only create their content, but then also learn how to really distribute it, you know, because not everybody knows that they have to, you know, create their files in certain formats to be able to distribute them, and how to kind of use it in support of a campaign or get the word out. So again, my concern is that, you know, we're just not going to be able to have the same access or facility to be able to distribute our content and be, you know, the change makers that we hope to be. Because I mean, again, you know, we are covering local news, local issues that in some cases, you know, might not be popular or may be counter to the narrative that could be coming through kind of commercial mainstream broadcasters. And my concern is that, you know, we're going to not be able to, you know, people are going to get frustrated because they're going to get that spinning wheel, or, you know, they're not going to be able to find, you know, they're going to be able to download the content in a timely fashion.
And beyond just content, I mean, our members use the PhillyCam website for everything, right?
Super good point. Yeah, it's incredible. Like, just, you know, that's how people register for the workshops. That's how they find out about what we're doing. That's how they share information. It's basically part of how we you know, have a cohesive, connected community of members. It's how we hope to get more people to even know about the shows and the issues that people are covering. You know, it kind of all like goes back to the website.
Yeah, and you know, email communications too is like the primary way that we all communicate, through listservs and, you know, our newsletter. Like, so much of what we do is web based. I think we almost take it for granted that, like, what would happen if our internet were suddenly taken away. I mean, again, the way people act when there's a power outage, like that is the only equivalent I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I'm really focusing more, you know, specifically on the, you know, sort of media files, video files, photos. You know, they are often like, you know, kind of higher. They require more bandwidth. And also, you know, for us as a content creator, we want to be able to upload our content. And lots of times there's limitations on what you're able to upload and the upload speeds. And so thinking about Deb Rudman, who is our program director, and how she relies on the internet to program our channel. I mean, everything, you know, is uploading shows on a daily basis. And if we get slowed down, that could, you know, halt our ability to keep a timely schedule. We pick up programming from other sources like Democracy Now! And Pacifica, and all of that is being shared kind of remotely through the internet. And for our ability to be able to download that content in a timely fashion, even air Democracy Now! Live in the morning, could be affected. And that's the stuff that I'm super concerned about.
Yeah, because we stream it live. So we pick up their stream. And also Pacifica puts all of their programs on audio port. So I would imagine that would be a site that could be a target, because it's already been the target of like cyber attacks, you know. And so the days that the website has been under attack, I was unable to download programs and I had to rerun old episodes. So even that has like affected my own ability to program for the radio station. So there's so many levels to this.
Yeah. And, you know, I was thinking about this morning. I mean, you know, I know part of the conversation that I think you're going to have the rest of this hour is like, you know, what can we do? Like, this battle is not over. This is, obviously something that's going to be ongoing. And as we look to, the results of the vote tomorrow, but what we'll be looking at in terms of as this goes into the courts and into Congress, and how our members can continue to have a voice in this fight. And it made me just, again, think about what made it possible for Philly Cam to have a radio station, and how the folks from Prometheus Radio and other media organizers around the country were able to successfully change policy at the FCC. So I'm kind of continuing to hold that, as sort of inspiration as to kind of what will be able to kind of carry us forward in this fight. And I think for me, another thing that we need to be thinking about is, looking at kind of how we can own our own community-based wireless internet and our creation of our own ISPs. I mean, I'm certainly really inspired by the work that folks are doing in Detroit at the Equitable Internet Initiative, and their ability to kind of be their own internet service provider. So you're essentially cutting out these mega corporations, the Verizons, the Comcasts, the AT&Ts, and Charter, who are going to be kind of sort of dictating the rules and doing what they want. So we need to go outside that system. They're actually, WPPM is able to have our signal go out over the air as a result of a small, they're a commercial ISP, but they're still an alternative, and that's Philly Whisper here in Philadelphia. So they're a for-profit, but it shows me that there are ways that technology can work, and that if we could look at how to do those kinds of community-based networks, that's also an alternative.
Absolutely. So if you're just tuning in, you're listening and watching the People Powered Lunch Hour show here on Philly Cam. And I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. And I was just speaking with our executive director here at Philly Cam, Gretjen Clausing. And we've been talking about net neutrality and a big vote that's happening at the FCC on Thursday, December 14th, where FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai is presenting a proposal to repeal net neutrality rules. And the concept of net neutrality is really about keeping the internet open and free and accessible to all, regardless of what type of content they are accessing. So I wanted to talk with two local organizers who we also have with us here in the group. We have Kitty Heite, who is a local organizer here in Philadelphia that's working with the Media Action Grassroots Network. And we also have with us via our internet technology in DC, we have Luong, who's with the Media Mobilizing Project, which is also the anchor group here for the Media Action Grassroots Network. So I wanted to talk with Kitty first. If you just pull your microphone a little bit forward, I want to welcome you. And I just want to give a shout out because Kitty, back in the early 2000s was involved with Prometheus Radio Project, phone banking and getting people to support low power FM radio. And we joked that, we're still here. Again, it's a different medium, but we're still advocating for people to be able to tell their own stories and access the media.
Yeah, I remember phone banking and when I was calling to bring people out for this, I just was struck with this wave of nostalgia almost of like, I'm saying the same thing. We need to have our voice heard. We need to have access to all of these avenues of presenting our story. So we are actually, we're super happy to be bringing a bus we're going to leave here at 6:00 tomorrow morning from Philly Cam down to DC so that we can join in with other grassroots media activists from around the country who are going to be outside of the FCC as they vote on this proposal from Ajit Pai. There are still a couple seats left, so if people want to join in, we can probably squeeze them in at this point. But yeah, it's going to be a ton of fun. We've had a lot of turnout even in the cold. The other night, about 250 people showed up outside of the Verizon store on Market Street, where we stayed for about an hour to really give voice to this frustration that we're going to be that we're looking at losing our access to the free and open internet as we know it today. One thing that struck me when we were talking about we were talking about how the internet is used on a daily basis, is that for any of us who've ever accessed support services from the state, like food stamps or TANF or any of these other benefits that a lot of people in Philadelphia use, we know that for the last few years they've been pushing us not to call into the phone center or go into the office, but to use the online portal. And I'm also thinking about friends and family that I have that live in rural areas or on reservations where that's also true. Like, to access the services that you need for survival, more and more the state and federal agencies are asking you to use their online portal. And if your internet access is limited to, so many gigabytes a month or so many megabytes a month, you're going to be, choosing to use that access to get your basic needs met, rather than, the other things that we use the internet for. It's like it's going to, once they turn our access to the internet into a scarce resource, then we have to start allocating the scarce resource. In reality, it doesn't have to be scarce. There's all of the bandwidth in the world for everybody to just have whatever fun or business they want to have online. And it's an artificial economy of scale to say, like, oh, you can only access this tiny little slice of the pie. And it just struck me like, oh man, it's like I'm going to have to register for my medical benefits online all the time, or I'm going to have to go into an office that doesn't exist anymore because they've been cutting staff and they've been cutting phone banks. So it was just another thing that struck me, as we are the largest, poorest big city in America, however we say that. That's something that's really going to hit a lot of Philadelphians hard.
Yes, indeed. So you briefly touched on the fact that there were actions all over the country last week. So I wanted to talk with Dee from Media Mobilizing Project. They played a big role in organizing that action at the Verizon store, and Erin, the national effort of people that turned out. I think it was like over 400 cities or places around the country.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for having me on the show. And about 300 people RSVP for the Verizon rally in Philadelphia, but it's one of 700 rallies that took place around the country. And you're able to see that on all sorts of social media, either on Facebook or Flickr. However, after what FCC is going to do tomorrow, we might not have the same ability to have our voice and show the support for net neutrality like we did with all these rallies that took place last week. And what was so significant about that action was it gave us a launching pad in Philadelphia. We were able to call those 300 RSVPs and ask them, please join us on the bus. And PhillyCam and Media Mobilizing, also under leadership of Erin, was instrumental in really just getting this bus together and to show our support, and so that we can all be there in DC in front of FCC tomorrow.
Why do you think it's important for people to show up and be present at these things, especially people who might not have ever come? I know that a lot of the people that I recruited to get on the bus have never done this kind of thing before, but they knew that it was a really big event and it was important.
There are the tone of tomorrow's rally is really to get out marginalized voices, particularly those who are not often invited to mainstream media networks like CNN or MSNBC. And those voices get a chance to contribute and discuss what their needs are and represent their local communities.
And can I also say that net neutrality is traditionally bipartisan and is overwhelmingly popular across the country. More than 80% of people are pro net neutrality. And so it's important to push back against this narrative that Chairman Pai is putting forward, that this will somehow help consumers when we know it won't. And so it's important for us to be in front of the FCC to show the world and to show Chairman Pai how deeply unpopular this repeal is, and that the fight continues. Although it may be repealed tomorrow, there's still ways to get involved and to continue the fight moving forward for a free and open internet for all.
One of the questions that I received on social media that came up a couple of times was, why are you targeting Verizon? What's Verizon's role in all of this, as opposed to some of the other internet service providers?
Ooh, let me tell you. Okay, so Chairman Pai is actually a former Verizon lawyer. And so he was actually like moved from Verizon to being a commissioner at the FCC, and then from being just a like standard commissioner after the election of Trump was tapped by Trump to be the chairman. And so we target Verizon because we know that he's still employed by them. He's still doing their bidding. And it's so important to make the connection between these large ISPs and their puppet in the government, which is Chairman Pai. Because like I said, this is deeply unpopular. The only people who are going to benefit aren't actually people. It's the 4 large ISP providers. There is no benefit to the average consumer, you or I. And so it's important to know that what he's doing is unpopular, but it's incredibly popular to the people he's serving, which is, these large ISPs.
Kitty, I wanted to bring up something that you told me about yesterday, which is a video that was released by Ajit Pai himself, where he was trying to be funny. Could you tell our listeners like what that video, what it had in it?
So this was at the FCC dinner gala event. And traditionally, you're not allowed to record, but somebody snuck recording this skit, I guess, that he put up, which was supposed to be a joke of him 13 years ago in the Verizon office. And one of the CEOs of Verizon came and said, hey, we need someone who's young and dynamic and energetic to infiltrate the FCC so that they can take over and we can repeal net neutrality provisions. And he was like, oh, great, I'll do that. That sounds like fun. And, I think the intent of this joke was to sort of say, oh, you silly people think that this is a conspiracy. But as we know, as Erin just mentioned, he's still getting paid by Verizon as he is repealing the provisions that allow free and open access to the internet and will actually only benefit these top 4 companies. So it doesn't feel very funny. I can see why they didn't want anyone to record. You can find the video online. It's incredibly grainy and it's sort of hard to see because somebody was like hiding behind a railing recording it. But his whole stand-up act was about 20 minutes of facepalm, cringeworthy, non-humor.
Yeah, I mean the joke's on us, right? Because if even joking about putting somebody in there to represent their interests, feels like just really insulting in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
Because it's an office of public service, right? And ultimately everything that we do here, like even our license, like all of our paperwork for what we do with the FC is serving the public interest. And so that's ultimately like why people are licensed to do anything on the internet or on the electromagnetic spectrum. And so it doesn't feel like the public is being served with that kind of nonsense.
No, and in fact, there was an article that vice.motherboard.com put out yesterday, which was really good. And it looked at a report by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which looked at actual data from the FCC itself and found that about 129 million Americans, which is about 40% of the country, have access to only one internet service provider. So they only have Comcast or Verizon or Warner Brothers. And then of those that have access to more than one ISP, 50 million Americans would be limited to choosing an ISP that has violated net neutrality, like choosing between 2 ISPs that have violated net neutrality provisions already. So I think that's true here in Philadelphia. You pretty much for broadband connection can choose between Comcast or Verizon. Both Comcast and Verizon have been found violating, or at least in like sort of that gray area of almost violating net neutrality provisions in the past. So that means that we choose between 2 ISPs that already have shown that they violate net neutrality. And that to me eliminates his entire argument that this is to benefit the free market. Like if we lived in a city that actually had 4, 5, 6 ISPs, broadband providers that we could choose between and they were actually in competition with each other, then that would make sense. But there's not a dime's worth of difference between Comcast and Verizon. And those are your only choices at this point. So I think that it's pretty clear just from FCC's own data that this has nothing to do with benefiting the consumers or benefiting a free market, because we don't have one.
Another argument for creating our own internet networks. So if you're just tuning in, this is the People Power Lunch Hour Show. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and I've been talking with some amazing organizers and our executive director, Gretjen Clausing, who, is advocating along with the rest of us, for net neutrality rules to be maintained so that our internet can remain open and free. So we're going to take a short break. And in the second half of the show, we'll talk more about what to do after the vote and explore some possible scenarios if the vote is won, if the vote is lost, because this is by no means, a short-term battle. It is going to be a long-term fight that we will all be engaged in, and we are excited to tell you more. So stay tuned. You're watching Philly Cam TV and listening on WPPM 106.5 FM. We'll be right back. We hope you stay with us.
Just so fun. Great job, Vanessa, getting all those people on the bus. Oh.
Welcome back to Power Lunch Hour Show, and I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and I'm joined in the studio with local organizer and advocate for net neutrality, Kitty Heite, and she's working with the Media Action Grassroots Network, and we've been together organizing people to get on the bus to the FCC, which is having a major vote tomorrow on the repeal of net neutrality rules. So earlier in the show, we were kind of talking about what net neutrality is and what its potential impact on consumers is, and why people need to, lend their voices to this and advocate for a free and open internet. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, what are some potential scenarios that could play out tomorrow. And so I want to look to you, Erin, as our internet organizer, to talk about what it might look like if, we lose the vote and the FCC votes to repeal the rules. What are the next steps? What are the possible options for all of those who are involved in this effort? And for people that are looking to get involved, what's the trajectory if the FCC does not do the right thing?
Yeah, so what will happen? So just realism here is we will likely lose this vote. However, what will happen afterwards is that a number of advocacy groups will take the FCC to court to challenge the rules. And we have a pretty good shot at winning those lawsuits. The 2015 open internet rules have been upheld in court twice. So we are on relatively solid legal footing for this fight. In addition to that, we will look to Congress for two reasons. We are looking to if we have legislation in Congress, to make sure that it is no less than what we have at the FCC now, which is the 2015 Open Internet Rules. We're also looking to have a bit of an accountability moment. So 2018 midterms are coming up, and we want to make sure that representatives of ours that did not speak publicly about net neutrality hear from us to pay a price for, selling our internet, down the river. And so it's important that we stay focused and vigilant and are maintaining pressure on our congressional members to make public statements in support of net neutrality. Right now, make public statements to stop the vote, and also pass the vote. Make public statements that whatever legislation is pushed through is no less than the 2015 Open Internet Rules that we have now. So there's lots of work to be done, lots of organizing to be done, and this is just one piece of the fight. This vote is just one piece of the fight, and there's much more work to be done.
That's right. It's a marathon, not a sprint, as they say. And there are a lot of other options, for us as organizers and as a movement to pursue if this vote is lost. But stranger things have happened in Washington, D.C., and we've seen a number of miracles over the years. So all it will take is one person to change their vote in order to win. And so it's possible. I don't want to say it's impossible because, anything's possible. But the reality is that regardless, it seems like the internet service providers are going to put up a fight that is going to go beyond this vote and probably for many, many years to come. So can you kind of explain the role of the Media Action Grassroots Network and who it comprises of, and why we're kind of taking the time out of, usually, its members are media makers, a lot of us, and organizers, but we're all kind of, hands on deck moment right now.
Yeah, so Media Action Grassroots Network is a network of more than 100 community organizations from across the country working on various issues. Some media makers, some are racial justice organizations, some are both, many are both. The people that are the organizations that are in the network are comprised of many fights. So we have folks that are working on immigration, folks that are working on land issues, things like that. And why it's so important for we call it Magnet. So for Magnet to be at the forefront of this fight is because most people think that net neutrality is skews sort of really white and heavily male, right? And a lot of times our voices aren't really represented in this fight. And the stakes for our communities are incredibly high. We will likely be most impacted by this vote. Because our communities access the internet, a lot of our community access the internet primarily through smartphones, because it's cheaper than buying a traditional package. The current net neutrality rules protect smartphone usage in the same way that they protect traditional internet packages. And so it's important for families who are, accessing the internet, kids who are doing their homework via their smartphones through the internet and things like that, have their voices heard, and that we are centering racial justice in this conversation that can oftentimes be framed as a fight between companies. It's not about companies. My ED, Mac, here at CMJ says, it's about civil rights, not bits and bytes. And so it's really important that, people from our communities, low-income communities, Indigenous folks, immigrant communities, the disabilities community especially, has their voice heard and represented strongly in this fight. And that's really what Magnet is about. And also, we love to say that, net neutrality isn't a side issue to all of the other issues that we're working on. It's actually like a movement infrastructure issue, right? So a lot of our movements are powered by the internet. And so it's incredibly important that we are preserving this tool that allows us to connect, not just with people, down the street, but across the country and across the globe to really, show solidarity around the issues that we're facing. as people of color and as oppressed people across the world.
Yeah. Hi, Vanessa. You touched on before about ISPs putting up a fight, and they're not going to have rallies on the street, but they got to line. It's about their lobby dollars, and they're lobbying heavily. And so as they might be able to take away our platforms, but they can't take away our voices. So Magna will continue to demand more transparency on how much funding and how much of this lobby effort has been taking place and line the pockets of congressional members who have chosen to be silent.
I think one thing that I've found in trying to get people on this bus is I've reached out to a lot of my grassroots and organizing connections here in Philadelphia, and really trying to focus on reaching out to groups that work with communities of color and low-income folks and people with disabilities. And while I get, I hear a lot of support back, like, yeah, this is a great issue, this is a really big deal. I'm also hearing like, well, we haven't done a lot of organizing around this within our group or within our community, and I get it, because it's a weird sort of esoteric concept, but it's also something that we like use all of the time, every day. And just thinking about like No DAPL and the Keystone XL pipeline, or the murdered and missing Indigenous women movement that's starting to really pick up steam. Like, we need that hashtag, we need the articles that we're sharing and spreading the word, and we need to stay connected, especially if you're working for a national fight and you're trying to mobilize people nationally. It's not going to be enough to just have a Xeroxed phone list of people that you call, and so we need as organizers, like Erin touched on, like, this is a core issue that maybe in our next step, what we should be doing is really talking within organizing circles about how we can educate and motivate and mobilize people who don't necessarily see this as a priority.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, again, it's just making those connections about how, again, you will care and notice if it's taken away.
Right. Totally.
But there's a lot of preventative work that can be done around that. Dee, I wanted to talk to you about Media Mobilizing Project, because they're an anchor group of the Media Action Grassroots Network. So there are local leaders, and we are just like really glad to have a group like Media Mobilizing Project here in Philadelphia that works with people who are from these communities and engages them in telling their own stories. Can you talk about some of the work that you all do with, the people that are affiliated with your organization and how this might impact them?
Yes, I'm sorry that Hannah Sassman and Brian Mercer couldn't be here today. They would really love to talk about this issue. As part of the Media Mobilizing Project, I'm so proud that on a weekly basis, we're able to also be the people behind supporting Philly We Rise as a platform that put out there the information about the different rallies and different actions that are taking place around Philadelphia. And so we get to be there and Facebook live stream and tweet about it. And so it takes, doesn't require a high level of technical skill, that anyone could help participate and just share the videos virtually in order to spread the word. And even just screening it and also will help increase viewers and spread the word as well.
Yeah, and for folks that don't know, Media Mobilizing Project was involved in a lot of other victories, right? Like the franchise agreement here in Philadelphia with Comcast, which was historic for getting digital inclusion funds. And they were part of the fight to stop the Time Warner Comcast merger. And they were part of the low power FM movement and many more things. And so somebody who was at the protest on I believe that was like Wednesday last week, said, well, how are you so optimistic? And I said, because we've had so many victories, as a movement. And here locally in Philadelphia, groups like Prometheus Radio Project and Philly Cam and Media Mobilizing Project, together with Magnet, have won. We have won things. And that's why we're confident, You guys are nodding yes. Yes, occasionally we win.
It's important to we've been saying this the entire time, but this is a long, protracted struggle, right? And it's important to know that sometimes losses set you up for bigger wins. And Chairman Pai has overplayed his hand here. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we say that he is the most successful Trump appointee. All Trump appointees, as we've seen, are focused on dismantling the agencies that they're put in charge of. And Pai is no different here. And he is attempting to, sort of relinquish the FCC's responsibility to make sure consumers are not being taken advantage of. And with this repeal vote, we believe that he's actually overplayed his hand here and will significantly weaken his ability to govern in the future. This is so deeply unpopular. You go and Google, speaking of the internet, go and Google net neutrality right now. People are, 1,000 small businesses from across the country just released a letter about how this would impact and make their work much more difficult. We had racial justice leaders speaking out. We had faith leaders speaking out. We have, every different sector speaking out about how deeply unpopular this is to their base and to the work that they do. And so what we'll see is, Pai, who sort of props himself up as this, champion for communities of color and for rural communities and things like that, be really sort of have his reputation tarnished in the media and be revealed as, this sort of puppet for ISPs, for sure.
Yeah, again, the FCC has been very busy and a lot of things have flown under the radar. So I just want to point out two things that, caused me to be concerned. And one was the elimination of the main studio rule, which is a long rule that they've had, especially for non-commercial stations, that you had to have a main studio in your city of license. And so even when we applied for our low power FM license, we had to have a main studio here, and we got extra points on our application for making the studio publicly accessible and for creating 8 hours of local content a day. And those were good things that we put in place as a movement that advocated to change those rules to ensure that people still had access to the media. And so the elimination of the main studio rule means that big media companies who have licenses all over the city can basically lay off or fire their staff and pipe in network content. And they can do this all over the internet, and they don't need to have a studio and they don't need to have staff. So that's why part of our guiding principles here for our WPPM, a lot of people said this, we wanted real people, right? So I'm a real person here working the boards, and we included the language. It says rehumanizing radio. And so taking the main studio rule away essentially dehumanizes radio, right? Because now you can just operate computers. And I always think of our interns and our co-op students, because this, again, just means less opportunities for employment will be available at broadcast stations throughout the country. And that is not a good thing. The second thing that they did, which was the most recent thing, is that they increased the cap for media ownership. And so that will further increase media consolidation, which means that they can own more of a given market within a city. So there were caps in place so that one company couldn't come in and own everything. And so, again, they're chipping away at these things, again, under the guise of the public interest. But again, if we look at what media consolidation has done since the 1996 Telecommunications Act, it has not been beneficial to the public. There have been many, many jobs lost. There have been less choices for providers of media content. And there has been an eradication and elimination of locally owned media, especially by women and people of color. And for all those reasons, the internet has been like a really good alternative, right? And as I've seen less and less access to TV and radio, people have then looked to the internet and social media as a way out, as an alternative. And so I just wanted to make those points because, we kind of referenced several times, like, we're still at this again, whether it's getting the right to public access, whether it's the right to low power FM, whether it's the right to have broadband or the prison phone rates, which was another campaign that we worked on, and so now that I've mentioned it, I feel compelled to explain it. That was a campaign to cap the rates that phone companies could charge families who accepted calls from people who were in prison. And that's because they were really exploitative and taking advantage of the families who have committed no crimes and trying to give them access, to their family member or friend behind bars. And we know that people have a lower recidivism rate if they're able to communicate with their families and a support network outside of prison. And there's also a lot of restrictions on the way prisoners can communicate too, in terms of receiving mail and books and community. So at just many, many levels, like, communication is like under attack. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I also think this is part of a larger fight against surveillance and also our digital rights online. A few months ago, Congress passed legislation to allow ISPs once again to, like the Verizons out there and Comcast, to sell our browsing data. And they're just taking advantage of individuals and who we are and who we get to be and express online.
Yeah. And Erin, I wanted to ask you this question. You may or may not know, but the FCC has been under investigation or scrutiny because of 50 or 60,000 comments that they failed to make public.
Yeah, so there were a number of, so their whole thing is that, we don't need these rules because there have been no transgressions of net neutrality, right? And so what one of our partners did, NHMC, which is the National Hispanic Media Coalition, did was provided 50,000 comments of people saying, my speeds were throttled, my, any number of net neutrality complaints, and asked them to include it in the record for this vote. And Pi declined. They declined. So they're basically not providing in their own records a full and complete understanding of this issue. And so it's incredibly, we talk about how this is really like an attack on an incredibly democratic process. Millions of people provided comments over this past year, millions and millions of people, and they're, being completely ignored. And same goes for this smaller batch of complaints as well. It's really just these three commissioners making decisions for the rest of the country. We don't vote for them, and they are ignoring the will and the opinion of the American public who they claim to serve. So it's incredibly disturbing. And I think it's in line with sort of the themes of this administration and in line with what we've seen thus far from this administration, certainly.
All right, so folks, you need to pay attention, as we often say here at Philly Cam. You got to pay attention to what's happening right now, because there are a lot of things that are under attack. There are a lot of things, as Dee mentioned, being dismantled, and they are going to affect our democracy and our ability to communicate. So I want to end with all of you giving more information about your organizations. And Erin, if there's any hashtags people should be using if they want to follow this on social media and start, giving their voice to all of this.
Yeah, so you can find the Center for Media Justice at centerformediajustice.org. You can find us online at Media Justice. If you want to follow along with all of the work that we're doing, in terms of the actions that are happening here in DC and across the country, you can use the hashtag net neutrality. You can also use the hashtag stop the FCC. And you can see a number of the protests that happened last week and also some of the work that's happening tomorrow and today. So there's definitely ways to still plug in. And there's definitely still an opportunity to make calls to your congressional member and ask them to come out and publicly support the 2015 open internet rules and also to demand PI stop the vote.
Thank you. Dee, can you tell people more about how they could get connected or find out more about Media Mobilizing Project and Philly Re-Rise?
Yes, we are available on Facebook, and also find us through our website. And please follow Center Media Justice and also Media Mobilizing Project and Philly Re-Rise will be live streaming today around 2 p.m. So please follow us and join us on our action.
Yes, and Philly We Rise is a really, really great resource for those of you who are tuned in locally in the Philly, South Jersey area. It came out of the same ashes as the People Power Lunch Hour, which was things that were put into place after last year's election to give people resources. So we're glad that that has been a successful website and resource for people here. So tell folks one more time about the bus.
We have a bus. It's leaving from right here at Philly Cam offices tomorrow morning. We're asking that everybody meet by 6 a.m. There's still a couple seats left. So if you want to get a hold of either Vanessa or myself, my email address, I guess, is just kitty.heite@gmail.com. Or reach out through.
Yeah, you can also call us here at Philly Cam.
Yeah.
The number here is 267-639-5481 and info@phillycam.org.
Yeah. And so we're going to head down there. The rally is from 9 to noon. We're going to be out there making noise and celebrating a free and open internet where we can all communicate as we see fit, and trying to be as visible and vocal as possible down at the FCC building tomorrow morning in DC. And then as far as the bus goes, we're going to chill for a minute and then head back up, and we will have breakfast and lunch. So if that's a concern for you, and kids are welcome, so you can bring your kiddo along if you really need to do that. We'll be back well before 5 p.m.
Yeah, and Philly Cam's going to be filming for our Philly Cam News Voices show. And we'll also be doing interviews for People Power Lunch Hour and WPPM. Again, documentation is super important because there were lots of actions last week all across the country.
It was really
so
cool.
many. And I loved seeing it on my social media feed. You know, friends from the Bay Area, from New York, from DC, Chicago. I mean, there was just stuff going on everywhere, but there was very little mainstream media coverage. Mm-hmm. So do not be surprised if there is very little coverage of this tomorrow. But don't worry, your friends at Media Mobilizing Project, Center for Media Justice, and Philly Cam, we will be bringing you all of the news and information. So you can follow us on social media at Philly Cam on our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can also, you know, if you're interested in watching this show or any of our People Power Lunch Hour shows, we put them on our YouTube channel, and we also archive them on our website at phillycam.org. So I want to thank all of my wonderful guests, Gretjen Clausing, who is our executive director here at Philly Cam, Kitty Heite, who is our local organizer that we've been working with, and Dee Luong from the Media Mobilizing Project, and Erin Shields from the Center for Media Justice. Thank you so much for all the work you do, and hopefully we will continue fighting and winning. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the People Power Lunch Hour show. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and we'll be back next week with an all-new episode. Thanks for watching and listening.